Hello everyone, and welcome back to Planet Zoo. So today we're going to be hitting off with a speed build straight away. We're going to turn this ugly African penguin habitat into something incredibly beautiful. One of the things I've noticed while I was building away is that the penguins get stressed very easily, and it's causing a lot of frustration, notifications just piling up. So we've taken the penguins out of the habitat and we're going to redevelop this area. We're going to make it bigger, we're going to give them more places to hide and places to relieve their stress and get away from the public, because it is a popular habitat. There's a lot of foot traffic coming through here, so what we're going to do is we're going to try and disperse that traffic as well by creating multiple viewing areas. We're also going to play around with the webcams. Now, the webcams were a relatively new addition. I think they came out with the aquatic pack maybe, and they don't actually, what I thought would happen was I could put a TV screen that links all of the webcams up, and you can have 4 webcams on one TV screen and you can put them in an area where the public can actually see them. That doesn't happen, although that would be amazing. I think that's a feature that they should add. Hint, hint, Frontier, please give us it. So what it does is it increases your park's rating and the park's attractiveness, because people can obviously view those webcams online. So it gives you a small marketing boost basically. It's very small. I don't know if it depends on how many animals you can see in the webcam at any one time. I don't know if it's like a fluid moving thing, kind of like when you take a photo in Jurassic World Evolution, where you get more points depending on how many dinosaurs you fit in, or variation, or what have you. Anyway, we put some of them in and you will see those in the final showcase. I put 3 webcams in, one of them underwater, one of them in the new bedding area that we've created, and another one that's kind of just right at the park, the exhibit entrance where you can see the feeders and things like that. So lots of stuff to do today. We started by using these faux aquatic rocks, just moving them into position, giving them a little bit of a rotation just to make sure that there's enough variation in between as we're using the same piece over and over again. I wanted to make sure that that was there from the off. Obviously, the more we add on, it'll change and it'll look totally different as well. We took the path away because we are expanding the size of this habitat. And like I say, that'll give us a little bit more to play with in terms of creating additional viewing areas. I then dug out a little bit of space here because I'm going to make an underground cave with a nice little access, and that's where the main sleeping area is going to be for the African penguins. I'm leaving that little area that I created at the start up there because it's a nice little basking space. The light reflects it really quite nicely, and I think it's a nice little place for them to go and have a rest in the middle of the day or something, or if we get sudden bout of rain or snow, they can quickly retreat into there until the snow passes or what have you, or until they can go downstairs. So this area is going to be where our cave is. I just filled it in again because I wasn't quite happy with that, and I kind of wanted to make sure that I'd done everything right. This little bump up in the path, I was actually planning on making a overlook so that people could look down into the habitat, and it's not going to work out like that. It just doesn't work. So it kind of serves no purpose at the moment, but in a future episode it will, when I bring back the pygmy hippos. Anyway, in this sleeping area we dug down a little bit, and then it was all about making sure the ramp going into this sleeping quarters was enough of a ramp that it was navigable area for the penguins. So it was just making sure there was a not too steep curve going into that area, and then we just cover it all up with sand and gravel and rock and stuff. Of course, I forgot to put sand in, and that's what the penguins mainly need. Their habitat consists mostly of sand, so that's something else that we have to change. Then it was just a case of smoothing out the rock, the terrain itself, and starting to pull in these rocks again. And it was just about making a little wall, doing little bits at a time, and this is my main bit of advice for if you're going to really put some effort into a build. Be prepared to spend about 3 hours on it. You can see what I've done so far in previous episodes. I've done lots of stuff in a short space of time, and they take about 3 hours. 3 hours worth of work, and I do a fair bit of an area, but there are often little bits of detailing missing, and I do plan to go back and sort that out. I keep saying this, but I will do it, because before we build any new habitats, I want to make sure that everything is right and everything is finished. So you're going to see a lot of smaller episodes and stuff where I do finishing touches or redevelopments on certain areas that I've got in the zoo. The main one going to be the Africa habitat. Back to this build though, so I'm using these plaster panels because I want something for my rocks to automatically stick to. I'll explain that when I actually put the rocks down, but basically, rather than having stuff floating and having to mess around with the tools, I put these in and then the rocks just sit on top of it, and then you've already got a starting point for any developments on this roof that we're going to make, which is all going to be the faux rocks. So here we are putting them in. They just sit flush on them straight away, and you can sink them down a little bit and it hides the entirety of that panel. We do this all the way around. Of course, I've seen a lot of people really use these effectively, where they've actually left some of the panels exposed and put like ventilation and stuff in, so it looks like they've built this deliberately and put in like an extractor fan or something to take out humidity and things like that. And I think it's a really nice effective use of these panels, and they're such a good utility piece that you can use them for just about anything. You can decorate with them, you can use them in the way that I'm using them, and they just give like a nice platform to start building on. Most of the time you don't have to leave them exposed, you can completely cover them up, which is what I'm going to try and do with this. Hopefully I get it right, but it does become a little bit fiddly. But this is certainly easier than moving each individual piece into play like you would normally do if you didn't have these plaster pieces in. So we were just mixing up between above ground and below ground just to make sure that everything sat flush and nice. At the moment it doesn't look great, but once you get everything in place, this looks fantastic. I was really proud with the end of this build, so happy with it. To put it into context, this build alone took about 3.5 hours. Most of my other stuff has taken either far less time, or I've done a lot more in the 3.5 hours or whatever that I build for. So this was a huge project, but I really felt proud of it. Like when I finished it and I saw the webcams and I did the little showcase at the end, I was like, man, this was great. I hope you guys like it as well. If you don't, that's fine. But it was just, I think this represents me finally finding my style and the way that I want to build. And I was really happy with that. And hopefully I'll get quicker, I'll be quicker with the tools and stuff, and we'll be able to cover a lot more ground, because I'm conscious of the fact that I do a lot of these speed builds and there's bits skipped out because I've spent a lot of time faffing around with certain pieces, so I've cut them from the video completely because it's just not something that I want to show you guys. But what I'm planning on doing in future is a mix of speed builds. So we'll plan out little bits and I'll do a little bit more of an in-depth talk of the pieces that I'm going to use and why I'm going to use them and how I'm going to use them. Then I'll cut to the speed build where I'm using those pieces and you see that development happening, and then we'll cut back to something a little bit slow paced to discuss whatever's happening next. Like here, we want to make sure that there's enough differentiation so that it's not clear that these are multiple duplicates of the same piece. So we put in some of the smaller pieces and just sink them in a touch just to give you that variation so that it doesn't look like I've just duplicated a multitude of the same piece, because that's something that I always hate seeing, and something that I've always found difficult to get over actually when I'm initially starting to build, is everything seems to look similar, but it will until you start putting those finishing touches and those little details on. So like here, we're just using these flat rocks and we just move them into space as a group to create essentially the roof of this shelter. But then we start playing around with them, moving them, adjusting the heights, giving them slight rotations, and it already looks a little bit different, and like we haven't just multiplied these pieces over and over again. Obviously, because you're seeing them in that flat form, you can pretty much tell, but once you put the smaller rocks in, a little bit of grass, a couple of trees and things like that, it covers them very well, and it makes the build really stand out. And this is the kind of, I wouldn't say this was advanced level building, but it's that first step to getting there. Like where you go from the basic structures and stuff and start really branching out. And it's taken me, I think I've got about 130 hours logged in game now, and that's a long time, but there's a definite progress, and I feel myself getting a lot more comfortable with the pieces and stuff. So this is going to be our second viewing area. When you get to the bottom of these stairs, we're going to have a nice little bit of glass where guests are going to be able to see them in their sleeping quarters, and the webcam will be there as well. So essentially the webcams are recreating the guest views. There's an underwater viewing area already that we had from the first iteration of this build, and then we've also got this new sleeping area, and then an area that shows you the main part of the habitat where guests will also be able to see. So essentially you've got a guest's eye view when you look at those webcams, which I think is really nice. It would be really cool if we could put them on a big screen as well. I just think that would be really nice, because you could do like different viewing areas. So you could have somewhere in a completely different part of the park with a TV screen on that links to these webcams, so that guests can actually see what's going on and then maybe throw in a donation there. I think that would be a really cool idea. So after doing this, I was concerned that the penguins may be able to make a run for it and cause chaos in the rest of the zoo, so we put in a few more boulders just to finish this off. I had thought about experimenting with the colours here, but I quite like this sandy colour, especially considering the African penguins are mainly sand based. They have a lot of soil and sand in their habitats. It's not really green, it doesn't really have anything to pop, so we couldn't really colour these grey or anything. So I was pretty comfortable with that. I did play around with the colours, and the one criticism I do have of these rocks is these colours look great. As soon as you change the colour to anything that's a little bit different, it doesn't work quite as well. I can see where they would work underwater, like if you gave them like a cyan colour or something and then put them underwater, they'd really stand out against that dark and dingy water that you can often see when you kind of look at the underwater sections. The visibility is really quite poor. But if these rocks are a different colour and you have some light reflecting off them, it can really brighten up those underwater areas, which is really cool. It's just a little bit difficult to have them placed above ground because you're very limited on the types of colour. So I would probably defer to the actual standard rocks like the tigers, the desert rock and all of that sort of stuff. The only problem is some of those rocks don't have the pieces that these have, and I prefer these pieces. I think they're amazing. You've got a lot of creativity that's like right there in front of you with them, whereas the other ones, they're all sorts of different shapes and things, and that's cool, but you can't actually like piece them together like a puzzle like you can with such ease on these pieces. And then all it takes is to throw down some of these smaller bits, and there you have it. You've got a really varied build. Moving on anyway, I wanted to make sure that there was some stairs going in so that the penguins had access to the water. Now, it's not too bad actually because they can jump in. It's more a case of getting them out, and that was where I was having difficulty. So I wanted to make sure that we put in these stairs because actually they don't need to go all the way down to the depths. What they can do is they can stop halfway, kind of like a jetty, or like a small like a boat ramp where you get your boat into the water. That's what it can be, because they can just swim up to this part and start stepping on out. So that was another case of us playing around with the rocks and making sure that everything was right. And this I was really impressed with. I was quite surprised because this was only supposed to be a little project and I spent a lot of time on this particular part. But yeah, really happy with how it's come out. As you'll see as we develop it a little bit more, it looks pretty basic there, but once we were finished, man, very happy with it. So here we're just going over the fine details, just putting in some of these smaller rocks and blocks just to make sure that those little gaps and imperfections are covered up. Just so that we don't have to do any of this once we've finished the build. That's what I'm trying to do, is put in a few more of those fine details as I go. Because I always say this when I'm doing these videos, that I'll come back and I'll do this and all of that. And I do remember to do it, just inevitably I've said it about so many different things that I forget, and something's always missing. I've been going back through some of my old builds in this franchise because I want to start doing some tidying up before we move on and expand. And I've been having the same issues over and over again where I've gone, oh god, I missed that off. Oh, I missed that. So I would like at some point to just do a video where I finish things. So we'll go back through every single habitat, have a little sit rep, have a look at what we need to do, then do it. And that's just what I want to do. So we'll do a few more episodes. We've got a lot of development to do that are like large scale builds in the zoo that we currently have, and I want to make sure that they're all done before we progress any further. Like, we've got a new train station to build. I want to finish off that Wild Africa habitat as well and get that really up to code and looking good. And then we've got a few like visitor pathing areas that I want to sort out. So yeah, that sounds like a lot. It's not, it's just going to take us a bit of time. Anyway, back to this build. We are using some of the shapes here because they're really easy. They have a flat colour, so it's very difficult to spot any sort of clipping, and we're just going to form up a nice little barrier with these. I think these look really cool when used correctly, and if you can incorporate something else as like a bit of a buffer colour or like a shadow of some description, they look really, really nice, and I think they fit in really nicely here. Straight away, we've got a doorway there with a nice bit of glass in between so that visitors can have a little look through. It's also our keeper entrance, and we can finish off with a few plants and stuff on the outside there. And then we copy this around and fit it in and make it the barrier going all the way around, obscuring the little detailing errors there with the glass barriers, which I don't really like. A lot of the barriers I'm not really keen on in the game, so I prefer to make my own and just have a lot of glass in there, because animals won't actually go over that. So you could actually really null barrier this all the way around. The only difference is we need the water, so we obviously have to have a glass barrier there. But if we wanted to, we could null barrier everything all the way around and just make sure that we have enough of like a height on the pieces that we used to build with, or put fences in them, like the mesh fence and stuff. Guests can still see through them, see the animals, and you've built there an artificial barrier without the need of using the barrier tools, which actually sometimes is a lot better, because you can have your path go right up to that barrier. And as long as you have a solid barrier for where your staff entrance is, you're actually alright. And I experiment with this a lot now, mainly in this one, but also we've redeveloped the Africa habitat. You'll see that in an episode or so, and I've used it a lot there. We've just null barriered so much of it and created some height to prevent the animals escaping. And it's just great. It's really effective. It gives you enough to play with that you don't have to worry about where the barriers are actually going to go. So yeah, I really like it. It's a nice new technique that I've learned there. So this next underground viewing area was just about finished, and we were just tidying up with some rocks, just making sure that everything looked nice, because a couple of them did look a bit wayward. They were kind of like sticking out at a weird angle and nothing supporting them underneath. So it's just a case of sorting all of that out. And that's those barriers done. Next up, putting in some logs just to make it look like there's some support on these areas here. And I love these big thick ones. They look really cool. They really finish off an area, and they look like they provide a lot of support, so they pretty much fit in with most habitats. I like these, and I really like the girders from the new world pack. I think they look really cool, and they're very useful as well. You can incorporate them into so many different builds, but these in particular stand out for me at the moment, especially with this build, because I think they stand out really nicely with those rocks, and they really finish off this habitat. The last thing I wanted to do was kind of make a trim on the very top, and you'll see that in the finished article. We just used some green metal trims, and then it was a case of putting our sand in, making sure that there was enough to keep the penguins happy, throwing down some bedding and stuff for them. Pretty much all of this ended up getting covered in sand because it was the only way they would be happy. We moved some of these grasses around because they were so overlapping. They were actually fulfilling all of the plant coverage need, and I wanted to use a little bit of grass and trees on here to really finish this area off. So we used a lot of the drin grass and just put little tufts of it sticking out of the rocks. And this just adds a little bit of colour variation, because you look at that, it's all the same colour, just flat and a bit one-dimensional, even though there's a lot of dimensions to it with the like little detailing on the rocks and things like that. Having a couple of tufts of grass just poking out, and maybe like a tree, just really finishes it off and makes it interesting to look at, rather than, oh look, it's just a flat rock. So this was a lot of fun to do, and I really liked experimenting with this. And these grasses are fantastic to use. You can just put them anywhere. They fit in pretty much anywhere. They've got a low footprint, so you can put quite a few of them before the animals start getting annoyed. And because a lot of these are actually outside of the navigable area of the habitat, they don't actually count towards that coverage requirement. So they are just essentially a bit of decorative fluff that have little to no impact on the animals themselves, which is great for us because it means we can put as many of it in there as we can. We did also put down a few nice trees. These nice big palms went in there. I thought it was nice to have one there with a little bit of grass around it. Just think it gives a little bit of a statement to the habitat itself. And we put a few tufts of grass in the habitat itself, just poking out of the rocks again. And we were just about finished. I thought about putting another tree in the habitat itself, but then I changed my mind and decided that we just put a few palms just dotted around the outskirts. You can also see we threw down some penguin statues as well, just to really finish it off and advertise the build itself. And then I wanted to tidy up this little area of water that had kind of just encroached on the rest of the habitat, which I didn't really like. I put in a dock. It hasn't actually worked. What I wanted to do was have a feeder on here. The feeder's now being removed because the staff weren't going to fill it up. And I seem to remember these climbable platforms, the staff used to walk on them, because I remember when I first built the pygmy hippo and African buffalo habitats, I had one of these as a bridge and the staff walked across it. So I'm not really sure what's changed to stop them doing it. So this kind of ended up just being a fluff piece, just a little jetty that I'd put in. And it looks nice and it does add a little bit, but it's just a shame I can't get that feeder filled. I may come back and experiment a little bit more with this at some other point, but for now I'm not too bothered. It adds a nice little bit of a decorative item to the build itself, so I'm not too bothered about it not being particularly useful. We can always put a bit of rope and things on there, and I did have a penguin walk across it at some point and then dive straight in the water, but that's all I've seen happen with it. So all we did was put some of these long poles in, make sure they were right down into the water to add the support that I'm expecting of them, and then it was good to go. It may well be that it's just because I've used the climbable version of this. I could actually try putting the standard building blocks in and that might work, but for now I'm not too concerned. We are approaching our tour, so I'm putting in some rubber ducks and we will cut very soon to the finished tour of this habitat. And I really hope you enjoy the finished article. As you can see, a little bit of coverage issues, but we've sorted that now. Here we go. Just having a little sit down. Got a feeder in there. I just think it looks really, really nice. Underwater, plenty of area for them to swim in. We've got that underwater feeder working perfectly, and a little bit of grass coverage. This is the solarium, I suppose we'll call it. And then underground where the sleeping area is. Coming through, you've got that lovely webcam view. You can see the clock tower in the background, and then a few other bits and pieces. This nice underwater area again in the webcam, and then cutting back out. It's raining, but how good does this look? I'm really pleased with it, and I hope you are too. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching.